Part 14. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 131. At the same time, inside the Xuanhuan palace, many ministers and royal family members gathered together, their faces pale. They had been staying in the palace for several days and did not dare to leave even half a step. We could only discuss it anxiously. The Emperor of Great Qin is really crazy. When Chang'an City was in danger, he sent millions of troops and 2 saints to our Xuanhuan. Did he not care about his own life or death? I think that Han Jun knows that Chang'an will perish, so he wants to die with us. Vicious, really vicious. It's too late to say this now. There are millions of Qin soldiers and 2 saints outside the imperial capital. How can we resist them? Yes. Our Xuanhuan dynasty's 10,000-year foundation is probably going to be destroyed in one day. The ministers were talking a lot, their faces full of panic and anxiety. When they talked about the Emperor of Qin, they all showed resentment and gnashed their teeth. They really didn't expect that the Emperor of Qin would be so crazy. Facing a 3-party siege in Chang'an City, it is a critical moment of life and death. They did not hesitate to mobilize millions of soldiers and horses, and even invited saint-level beings to attack their Xuanhuan dynasty. If it weren't for the fact that there was a saint ancestor sitting in the palace in the Xuanhuan emperor's capital holding quasi-emperor soldiers, they would have been slaughtered long ago. Emperor Xuanhuan Lin Yuan sat on the high platform, his face as if sinking in water, quietly watching the discussion of his ministers. He was dressed in a golden dragon robe, his brows showed majesty and dominance, and every move he made contained the power of a superior. But at this time, his eyes were cloudy and uncertain, and it was clear that he was not as calm as he appeared on the surface. Only he knows how bad the current situation in the Xuanhuan imperial capital is. Although the Saint Patriarch held the quasi-emperor soldier and repelled the 2 saints from Great Qin, the situation was not optimistic. First of all, the ancestor of the saint is already old and has a short lifespan. He cannot maintain the quasi-imperial weapon for a long time. However, the 2 female saints from Great Qin have no longevity limit at all. The longer the 2 sides fight, the more unfavorable the situation will be for the Xuanhuan Empire. Once the fight continues, the one who will eventually fall will definitely be his sage ancestor. In addition, their Xuanhuan imperial capital currently only has hundreds of thousands of troops guarding it, while the other side has millions of troops. Regardless of the number of saints or conventional combat power, the Xuanhuan dynasty was far inferior to the Qin army at this time. Now they can only wait for reinforcements, and maybe there is a chance of victory. Otherwise, the moment the saint ancestor cannot resist, the Xuanhuan palace will fall. Your Majesty, what should we do now? A minister came up and asked cautiously. The other ministers also focused their attention on Emperor Xuanhuan. Their only hope now was their Majesty. If he is helpless, then they may just have to wait for the moment of destruction to come. I really didn't expect that the Emperor of Qin would be so ruthless. He not only mobilized 1 million troops to surround the imperial capital, but also transferred 2 saints away from Chang'an. Emperor Xuanhuan Yuan glanced at the minister and said solemnly. At this moment, he could not show any signs of panic. He must stabilize the morale of the army and bring hope to the ministers. Emperor Xuanhuan looked around and said seriously. But don't worry, everyone. I have just notified all the armies to come to support. I believe they will come to rescue you soon. As for the ancestors who are far away in Chang'an City, I am already contacting them. With the ability of the ancestors, it only takes half a day to get back to Xuanhuan. When the ministers heard this, they immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Although this will make the defenses at each border weak and even lose the best opportunity to attack Chang'an. But right now I don't care about that much anymore. Your Majesty is wise. Some smart people quickly flattered and complimented him. Ha ha ha, since His Majesty has made all preparations, we don't have to worry. The Emperor of Qin is simply seeking death. We, Xuanhuan, are an eternal imperial dynasty. How can we let them do whatever they want? How can the mere great Qin be able to defeat me, Xuanhuan? After De Qin is destroyed, I will definitely cut the Emperor of De Qin into pieces with 1,000 knives, twitch his muscles and peel off his skin. Some ministers also reacted and laughed immediately. Upon seeing this, Emperor Xuanhuan Linyuan raised the corners of his mouth slightly, revealing a smile. He waved his hand to signal everyone to be quiet. Then he stood up and said loudly, "Don't worry, dear friends, with the help of our ancestors, our Xuanhuan dynasty will definitely be able to survive this disaster." However, the words just fell. Report. Suddenly, there was an exclamation in the hall, and a member of the Royal Forest Guards rushed in, knelt on the ground and shouted, "Your Majesty, the great Qin cavalry has broken through the city gate and is now advancing towards the palace." What? After hearing the eunuch's report, all the ministers in the Xuanhuan Emperor's dynasty suddenly turned pale and were extremely frightened. Especially those members of the royal family were trembling. Emperor Xuanhuan Linyuan's expression also changed, but he soon stabilized and said in a deep voice, "Don't worry, everyone. The palace is guarded by our ancestors and there are quasi-emperor soldiers stationed there. The Qin army cannot attack." The ministers looked at each other, swallowed a mouthful of saliva, and their nervous expressions relaxed a little. Immediately afterwards, another high-pitched voice sounded. "Your Majesty, something is wrong. The second prince, 7 princesses and 9 princesses have all been taken away." Hiss. This sentence instantly shook the hall like thunder. There was an uproar in the hall, and everyone took a deep breath and looked around in doubt. What did you say?" Emperor Xuanhuan widened his eyes, his pupils shrank, and his face turned pale. His originally calm face suddenly became distorted and hideous, and he grabbed the eunuch's collar and shouted, "Didn't I send someone to pick them up? How could they be captured?" Emperor Xuanhuan Linyuan's face changed drastically. The eunuch was terrified, trembling all over, crying, "Your Majesty, spare my life, the people you sent were all killed by the great Qin saint, and the second prince and the 7th and 9th princesses were captured before they could enter the palace. Get out! Trash!" Emperor Xuanhuan was furious, kicked the eunuch away, and roared, and the whole hall seemed to tremble. The other ministers were all silent when they saw this, and could only speak to comfort him. "Your Majesty, don't worry. As long as the ancestors of Chang'an City return to Xuanhuan, all crises will be solved. Please be patient, Your Majesty, and wait for the ancestors to return." "Yes, Your Majesty, as long as Xuanhuan stands in the world, even if the princes and princesses are abducted by the Qin dynasty, they will never dare to do anything to the second prince. Don't be angry, take care of your body. Your Majesty, calm down." After hearing the advice, Emperor Xuanhuan took a deep breath, tried to suppress his anger, and tried to calm himself down. No matter what, he was also a great emperor, and he could still keep the situation stable. But at this moment, a loud noise suddenly sounded outside the hall. "At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid." Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 132. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. It's not good, something serious is going to happen. Destroyed. Destroyed. All destroyed. Everyone looked around and saw an old man covered in blood stumbling in, with a look of horror on his face. "Prime Minister, don't panic, what is destroyed?" Seeing the old man's embarrassed appearance, Emperor Xuanhuan frowned and scolded angrily. This old man was the prime minister of the Xuanhuan dynasty and was in charge of many crucial matters in the Xuanhuan dynasty. As if he had been greatly frightened, The old man fell to the ground and replied in a trembling tone. Back, back, your majesty, the saint ancestors who went to Chang'an city, their soul lamps, all went out. Boom. This sound reached everyone's ears like the earth was shattering. The entire hall fell into an eerie silence, and everyone was stunned. The death of the saint soul lamp, what does this mean? Huh? Are you sure? Lin Yuan's eyes were as wide as bells, filled with disbelief. The old man nodded vigorously, his lips trembling. I have been guarding the soul lamps of our ancestors. I saw it with my own eyes. After a pause, the old man continued, actually, in fact, the soul lamps of the ancestors have been extinguished long ago, but the old minister did not believe this fact, and observed it for a long time, and finally confirmed. When Emperor Xuanhuan heard this, his face instantly turned pale. This time, he couldn't bear it any longer and sat down on the dragon chair. His blood flowed to his head and he almost fainted. The other courtiers also looked as if they were mourning for their heirs, and their faces were extremely gloomy. No way, no way. Emperor Xuanhuan Lin Yuan shook his head, his face full of disbelief, and he muttered something. He sent a total of 5 saint-level experts. This kind of lineup is enough to sweep all enemies. How could it be possible to lose? Not only Emperor Xuanhuan, but everyone present could not understand it. Your Majesty, this. A civil servant gritted his teeth and wanted to say something. However, Emperor Xuanhuan Lin Yuan suddenly raised his head, his eyes were red, staring at the civil servant who spoke, and roared extremely violently. Shut up. Retreat. After the words fell, he took the first step to leave, leaving the courtiers in the hall looking at each other, and they all saw the shock and despair on each other's faces. Your Majesty, it's not good. The Qin army has already arrived at the palace, Your Majesty. At this moment, another scream sounded. I saw a soldier with a hurried look running in staggeringly. He stammered while breathing heavily. In an instant, the already gloomy atmosphere suddenly reached its peak. Bastard! Didn't you hear me tell you to shut up? Emperor Xuanhuan suddenly turned around, smashed a soldier's head with one punch, and roared again and again. Bang! Blood sprayed all over the ground, and the soldier collapsed to the ground without making any sound. This sudden scene made everyone in the hall stunned, and immediately they were all frightened and silent. Stop your lack of fighting spirit. Have you forgotten that I, the third Princess Xuanhuan, am a direct disciple of the Xiwei Immortal Palace in the Apocalypse domain? Her master is in the quasi-emperor realm, and that is the ancient supreme being. 1. No matter how powerful the Qin is, as long as Xiwei Immortal Palace comes forward, they won't dare to do anything to us. The most important thing you should do now is to cheer up, protect the palace, and rescue the second prince and several princesses. Emperor Xuanhuan Lin Yuan barely regained some sense and shouted through gritted teeth. He clenched his hands, his knuckles turned white, and spoke each word with sonorous force. Yes, this was the greatest confidence of the Xuanhuan dynasty. It was precisely because of this confidence that he had great confidence and aroused his ambition to annex Great Qin. But Lin Yuan didn't expect that this battle would be so tragic. None of the 5 saint ancestors from Xuanhuan survived. His heart was twitching hard. The civil and military officials in the main hall heard this. Suddenly his eyes lit up with hope. Yes. They have the support of Xiwei Immortal Palace behind them. Xiwei Immortal Palace, this is a superpower that surpasses the dynasty. With their support, the Qin would never dare to attack them easily. What His Majesty said is that we must persevere. Guard the palace at all costs. As long as it is delayed until Xiwei Immortal Palace takes action, the Qin will never dare to act recklessly. That's right. Standing behind us is Xiwei Immortal Palace, they will definitely not stand idly by. Suddenly, all the courtiers in the main hall were excited. Okay. Lin Yuan waved his hand and said loudly, I will send a message to Xiwei Immortal Palace now and ask them to come out to help as soon as possible. After saying that, Lin Yuan hurriedly turned around and left. Seeing the back of Emperor Xuanhuan hurriedly leaving, all the courtiers in the hall felt a glimmer of hope in their hearts. After all, that is Xiwei Immortal Palace, who dares to offend? Deep in the Xuanhuan Palace, a white-haired old man was sitting cross-legged in a secret room, with a golden flag floating above his head. His eyes were slightly closed, and his whole body was filled with wisps of terrifying fluctuations. That is the special majesty that can only be found in the realm of saints. At this moment, he suddenly opened his eyes sharp and sharp. He stood up slowly, took one step forward, and appeared directly in the void. Then, he saw Lin Yuan standing not far away with a respectful expression. Ancestor, how is the situation? The old man's face turned cold and he said in a deep voice, the situation is not good. The abilities of the two female saints are too weird. I am no match. The Red Sun banner can resist for 7 more days at most, so I'm afraid I won't be able to stop them. There was a hint of bitterness on his face. In the past few days, he has been using the Red Sun banner, a quasi-imperial weapon, to protect the entire palace. If not, the Xuanhuan dynasty might no longer exist. 7 days. Lin Yuan said thoughtfully, 7 days is enough. Then he raised his head, looked at the old man, and said in a deep voice, Ancestor, I want to ask for help from Xiwei Immortal Palace, and please protect my Xuanhuan for the last 7 days. The old man nodded, I know everything about the situation, and this is all I can do now. Leave it to me. Lin Yuan finally felt relieved, bowed respectfully, and turned to leave. The old man's figure also disappeared and returned to the secret room. The next moment, a burst of bright light suddenly erupted above the palace. The void vibrates. Immediately afterwards, a long flag wreathed in flames appeared. Astonishingly, it was the Red Sun banner. The increasingly blazing red light fell down, covering the entire palace. What no one noticed was that a dark phantom flashed in a corner of the palace and disappeared. Huh! In the secret room, the old man suddenly frowned, seeming to feel some kind of uneasiness. As soon as his mind moved, the power of the Red Sun flag increased sharply, and it expanded 100 times again in an instant. Wow! Waves of scalding fire swept around, burning everything. Seeing this scene, the old man relaxed a little and sat back on the futon. At the same time, Qin Mu, who was playing with dumpling wrappers in Chang'an City, also had a panoramic view of this scene. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 133. Xiwei Fairy Palace. Qin Mu felt the smooth and delicate touch, his eyes flickering. It seems that the barbarian demon was right. The third princess of the Xuanhuan dynasty was indeed a direct disciple of the Xiwei Fairy Palace, and she had a very high status. It seems that the great Qin will have another powerful enemy. Qin Mu suddenly smiled. Not only did he not feel a trace of panic, but he was very excited, which meant that he could continue his great cause. Xiwei Fairy Palace, your strength had better be as strong as the world says, otherwise I will be very disappointed. Qin Mu murmured, with a faint smile on his lips. The mysterious phantom of the Xuanhuan dynasty was naturally one of the saint puppets he sent out, named Liasu. This saint puppet is good at breaking various restrictions and domain power. Especially for weapons such as formations and barriers, it has a great restraining effect. So even if the so-called Red Sun banner has reached the quasi-emperor level, it still can't stop the saint puppet from sneaking into the palace. Of course, the main reason is that the person using it is not very good. If a quasi-emperor uses the red sun banner, then Lu Su may not be able to do it. But even so, Qin Mu still has a great interest in the red sun banner. This red sun banner is indeed extraordinary, with very strong defensive capabilities and many magical uses. Coupled with the dusk bow he just seized, it has both offensive and defensive capabilities, which is perfect. Although he doesn't need it, he can give it to the saint puppet to use, which will definitely be of great use. If these two weapons are used together, I'm afraid even the quasi-emperor can have a fighting force. Qin Mu thought of this and immediately stopped hesitating and ordered Lu Su. Continue to lurk and monitor every move of the Xuanhuan palace. When I give the order, you will seize the red sun banner as soon as possible. Yes. Lu Su nodded and accepted the order, then quietly merged into the void and disappeared without a trace. Afterwards, Qin Mu took another look at the image of another saint puppet, Xuanhuan. She was still conscientiously searching for the princess of Xuanhuan and the wives of the ministers in the capital of Xuanhuan. Qin Mu nodded with satisfaction. Whether it was Xuanhuan or Liu Su, they were very reliable. It seemed that when the national teacher returned triumphantly, his dual cultivation technique would soon be greatly improved. Your Majesty, Zhang Luoshan seems to be unable to hold on. At this time, a soft and gentle voice sounded in Qin Mu's ears, with a little hesitation. Chang'an talented woman Han Sueki stood behind Qin Mu, wearing a gauze, whispering respectfully. Oh! Hearing this, Qin Mu's heart moved, and he looked up in the direction outside the hall. Zhang Luoshan's kneeling figure trembled slightly, her beautiful face was slightly pale, her beautiful eyes were slightly closed, and she was about to fall. The whole person looked very haggard, which made people feel pity. Even her smooth and white knees were bruised, with bloodstains clearly visible. Obviously, she did not use any strength, but only relied on her weak body and willpower to hold on. Otherwise, with her strength that had reached the Yuanshen realm, she would never kneel so hard. Zhang Luoshan had been kneeling for too long. And she gave up all her strength and knelt for so long in a mortal body. She was almost at her limit. This made many palace maids who had originally cast strange eyes on Zhang Luoshan change their views on her. They asked themselves that if it were them, they would not be able to hold on for so long. Han Sueki was one of the people who felt sympathy, or perhaps it was because Zhang Luoshan's experience reminded her of her past self, and she felt sorry for it. So she reminded him out loud. No matter what His Majesty decided in the end, at least she had made some small efforts. Han Sueki thought so. Qin Mu glanced at her slightly, and asked indifferently with an expressionless face. Why, do you want to kneel for her? Han Sueki's face changed, and she shook her head quickly. Your Majesty misunderstood, I didn't mean that. Heh. Qin Mu sneered, are you questioning me? Han Sueki was shocked and knelt on the ground in panic. I dare not, I didn't question your Majesty, I just wanted to. Before she finished speaking, Qin Mu interrupted her and said lightly. Since you love her so much, I will satisfy you, you go there and kneel too. Han Sueki's body froze and her mouth opened, but she didn't dare to say anything more. She knew that she had angered His Majesty, and it was useless to beg for mercy. Now the only thing she could do was to obey the will, otherwise she would end up very badly. Han Sueki had a bitter look on her face, but she had to walk out of the hall and slowly kneel beside Zhang Luoshan. The two women knelt side by side, their hips outlined two charming curves, which looked quite pleasing to the eye. Especially Han Sueki's curve, which was surprisingly round, like a piece of unpolished jade, exuding a seductive breath. After taking a look, Qin Mu retracted his gaze and looked at the other maids, and asked lightly. Is there anyone else who sympathizes with Zhang Luoshan? I can satisfy her together. As soon as the voice fell, the whole hall fell silent instantly. All the maids held their breath, and they didn't even dare to breathe. Qin Mu looked around at the crowd and said calmly, "Since no one is willing, then continue playing the music and dancing." The women immediately breathed a sigh of relief and began to wave their sleeves and dance. The hall was filled with music and singing and dancing. And Qin Mu randomly picked a maid who was playing the pipa. This maid had a delicate face, skin whiter than snow, and her every frown and smile was full of charm. And most importantly, this was a new face. Qin Mu felt a sense of freshness in his heart. She was wearing a green logo skirt, with a full and tall chest, a slender and soft waist, a delicate and convex figure, and a graceful curve. And her movements when playing the pipa were full of enchanting charm, which made people's hearts beat. Qin Mu's eyes lit up slightly, and he called her closer. "Come here, sit in my arms." Ah! The maid was stunned at first, and then two blushes flew across her face. She lowered her head in shyness and joy and replied, "Yes." Then she walked towards Qin Mu with lotus steps and sat gently on his legs. "It's you." Qin Mu looked at her and nodded slightly. Then he stretched out his hand to pull her into his arms, stroking her delicate skin, and smiled. "I haven't tried to play the pipa while making dumplings. Today, let me see your piano skills." Hearing this, the maid's pretty face flushed slightly, and she lowered her head shyly, not daring to look at Qin Mu. The corners of Qin Mu's mouth smiled even more, and whispered in her ear, "Remember, don't play the wrong notes, otherwise." Accompanied by Qin Mu's threatening words, the maid's delicate body trembled violently. She raised her head, her beautiful peach eyes were full of water. She didn't dare to say anything, just bit her lips and slowly closed her eyes. Then she stroked the strings with her bare hands and began to play. The elegant sound of the piano rang out, spreading in this joyful hall. Just when Qin Mu was indulging in sex. In the northern border of the Great Qin, a small frontier town only a few miles away from the Kangyu dynasty, a woman in red plain clothes slowly walked into the town. "At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid." Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 134. Sunset Town. This is the name of this border town. This town has about 70,000 to 80,000 people. The town is not big and the buildings are generally short. And because this place borders Kangyu's territory and has been baptized by war all year round, the two-bedroom houses on the street are very old and give off a bleak atmosphere. The woman in red tiptoed the ground and floated down. Then he moved lightly and walked down the street step by step. He was incompatible with the surrounding scene and was very conspicuous. Her temperament is cold and noble, like an orchid in an empty valley, which makes people dream and be impressed by her. Although her face was covered with a veil, which obscured her true appearance, she could still glimpse a bit of peerless beauty between her brows. But compared to the appearance, what is more eye-catching is the curvy, hot, and sexy figure. She was wearing a fiery red dress, and her long and straight legs were wrapped in a thin layer of fabric. The waist that is too full to hold is slender but plump, and is tied with a soft ribbon, which outlines a picture of perfect temptation. Her long black hair cascaded down her shoulders, highlighting her skin as white as ivory, making it look particularly alluring. Such an alluring body is enough to drive any man crazy and even take risks. But at this time, not many people in this town noticed the woman in red. Just because the streets were sparsely populated, and apart from a few pedestrians buying supplies, there was almost no human habitation. Even these pedestrians buying supplies were in a hurry and did not dare to stop at all, as if there was something very scary outside. The woman in red stood in the middle of the street and looked around. A pair of slender jade arms hugged the chest, outlining a thrilling and graceful arc. "Is this Qin? I haven't been here for many years." The woman's pair of autumn-cut pupils looked into the distance, with a strange light shining in her eyes. After looking at it several times, she continued walking along the street. Her steps were very fast, and she crossed the entire street in just a few steps, as if she was going to pass through this strange city. At this time, at the end of the street, there was a sudden burst of noise. Run! The Qin army is coming! Ah! Help! Help! The north has failed, let's run away. No! The Qin army is coming! Run away! Run away! The noise became louder and louder, mixed with bursts of shrill shouts. The originally quiet streets now turned into chaos. Pedestrians on the street were running in panic, shouting loudly and running for their lives. The woman in red frowned slightly and turned her head to follow the shouts. All I could see was dust billowing at the far end of the sky. Countless soldiers could be vaguely seen rushing towards this place. The fluttering flag has the word De Qin written on it, exuding the meaning of killing iron and blood. The woman in red stopped and looked at the rapidly approaching army, with a chilling murderous intent in her beautiful eyes. It is indeed the Qin army. It seems that Chang'an really failed. At this point, she sighed and murmured. My worries finally came. Then she dodged and hid in a hidden place. Rumble. A deafening thunderous noise suddenly exploded, shaking the sky. In the rolling torrent, I saw a giant flying boat as big as a mountain approaching at a high speed. It was as black as ink, traversing the void, and slammed into Sunset Town with a terrifying aura. Like a torrent rolling down. In an instant, tragic screams echoed throughout the town. Most of the residents of Sunset Town were crushed to death on the spot before they even had time to scream. The few remaining people who were lucky enough to escape fell to their knees, kowtowing and begging for mercy. Snort. On the giant ship, an angry shout rang out. His Majesty's decree is that those who conspire to rebel will be killed without mercy. As this cold voice sounded, a middle-aged man wearing golden armor and a golden helmet, with extraordinary martial prowess, stepped out slowly and stood on the bow of the ship. His back was as straight as a spear, and his eyes were as deep as the sea, as if they contained the stars of heaven and earth. Astonishingly, it was Huo Kang, the commander of the imperial guards of the Qin dynasty who swept across Jiangnan County. A treasonous traitor, why don't you bow your head and plead guilty? Huo Kang shouted coldly, and the sound turned into ripples visible to the naked eye and spread. Spare my life. Yes, sir, you know everything. How could we rebel? Please be patient. We are willing to give all our wealth to ask for forgiveness. My son is dead. I hope you will spare my life for the sake of my helplessness. Huo Kang's violent shout immediately frightened everyone to death. One by one, they were lying on the ground, crying and begging, kneeling and kowtowing, hoping to be forgiven. Surrender. Huo Kang sneered, murderous intent boiling in his eyes. The laws of the great Qin dynasty punish those who conspire against the 9 tribes, eradicate the grass and roots, and leave no chickens or dogs behind. Since you have become traitors and traitors, you should know what the outcome will be. As soon as he finished speaking, Huo Kang reached out with his palm, took a photo from the air, and instantly lifted a young man up. No, my lord, spare my life, my lord, spare my life. The young man struggled desperately, crying and begging to be let go. Bang! With a muffled sound, the young man's head was crushed like a watermelon, and blood spurted out. No, husband. A beautiful woman next to him burst into tears. She rushed forward to protect the young man's body. Noisy. Huo Kang flicked his sleeves, and a strong wind swept out, immediately rolling the beautiful woman onto the flying boat. He glanced at her coldly and nodded slightly. You are pretty, you can enter the palace. He waved his hand, and several female palace maids walked over and pulled the woman away. No. I don't want it. I don't want to go to the palace to accompany that tyrant. The beautiful woman burst into tears and cried miserably. But how could these female palace maids care? They dragged her away by force, stuffed her into the prison car, and escorted her into the palace. This scene made the people around them silent, especially those women who thought they were pretty. They lowered their heads and trembled. What a tyrant, so cruel, so conscienceless, no different from the devil. In a secluded place at the end of the street, the woman in red stared at this scene. A cold light flashed in her eyes. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Len Mian Bulletin Leng. Chapter 135. At this time, Huokang raised his head and swept his indifferent eyes across the town. Instantly, the whole town suddenly became silent, without any noise. Huokang retracted his gaze and said indifferently, "Kill without mercy." With his order, sharp long swords slashed through the void and slashed directly at the residents of Sunset Town who were begging for their lives. Puff! Instantly, blood spurted out, and the remains of corpses and bones splashed all over the sky. This scene frightened those who were lucky enough to survive and no longer cared about anything else. They ran away madly, trying to escape from this place. But Huokang was well prepared. The Qin soldiers had already occupied various places and blocked all directions. Escape. Huokang's eyes were dark. Where can you escape to? With a crisp sound, he shook his wrist, clenched his 5 fingers into a fist, and hammered into the void. In an instant, an invisible transparent aura ripple spread out, instantly covering 1,000 feet in radius. Then the Qin soldiers chopped down with swords and knives, and in an instant, those who tried to escape were killed on the spot. It's over. It's over. Watching his companions, friends, and relatives around him fall in a pool of blood one by one, both the monks and ordinary people were pale. Why is it like this? A middle-aged man slumped to the ground and closed his eyes in despair. Why did the North fail? Why did the tyrant act like this, and the Qin dynasty didn't perish? His words were full of despair and grief. Damn the tyrant, he is simply inhumane. I'm not willing. I'm not willing. Heaven is unfair. Inside and outside Sunset Town, countless people were extremely angry and desperate. Although they had thought about such a day when they supported the North. But they never expected that the defeat of the North would be so quick, and the revenge of the Qin would come so suddenly, quickly, and fiercely. A disagreement would lead to a massacre. It's simply a devil. A demon. In the surging clouds in the sky, Huokang stood with his hands behind his back, overlooking the whole city. Looking at the fire all over the city and hearing the frightened cry. A hint of sarcasm appeared between his eyebrows. How can you mortals understand your majesty's wisdom? In just a few moments, this one-sided battle was over. The entire Sunset Town was completely destroyed, and all the beautiful women were caught on the flying boat. Huokang looked at the scene coldly, without a trace of pity in his heart. When the soldiers of the North appeared in Chang'an City, these people were no longer the people of the Qin, but enemies. When dealing with enemies, you naturally cannot be merciful. Huokang had a blank expression and cold eyes. He killed the last monk in Sunset Town with his own hands. This was the last town in the North. If this town was taken, the entire North would be suppressed. It was time to report to His Majesty. Huokang took a last look. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, he suddenly paused and frowned slightly. He saw a red figure suddenly appear and quickly disappear in the jungle outside the town. Why not, rat, come out. Huokang's eyes flashed with brilliance. With a sharp roar, he stepped on the void and ascended to the sky. His eyes were as cold as frost, and he scanned the 8 wastelands. However, he did not find anything. Huh. Huokang frowned slightly. Is it an illusion? Huokang carefully explored again, but still did not find anything unusual. Could it be a certain master? Huokang pondered for a moment, thinking in his heart, and finally chose to retreat. After all, if the opponent is really strong, Even if he has a keen sense, it will be difficult to find him, and he may even fall into unnecessary danger. The next moment, Huo Kang's figure was erratic, like a breeze, sweeping out of this place, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. A moment later, the void suddenly rippled. A red figure walked out slowly, with deep and distant eyes. Such a keen perception, it seems that the Qin dynasty is really full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Maybe that tyrant is just using his idiocy to disguise himself and cover up his true strength. The woman in red muttered to herself. She looked at the sunset town that had become a ruin, and couldn't help sighing. I'm sorry, I could have saved you, but I can't be found now, otherwise the plan may be exposed, and I can only sacrifice you. The red-clothed woman who called herself I was none other than the legendary empress of the Kanyu dynasty, Ji Hongii. The next moment, she spread her palm, and a seven-color stone with a peculiar shape and exuding the essence of immortals flickered on it. The seven colors intertwined in turn, and a trace of mysterious life breath overflowed, filling the void, as if to open up the world and evolve the world. This origin fairy stone can finally come in handy, but it's a pity to waste it in this Qin. But as long as it can achieve the goal, it's worth paying some price. Ji Hongii stroked the seven-color stone and murmured to herself in her heart. Then she put away the seven-color stone, her figure turned into a ball of red smoke, and disappeared on the spot, as if she had never existed. 3 days later. Chang'an City. In the palace, in front of Viang Palace. Under the scorching sun, two graceful and delicate figures knelt on the ground. They were Zhang Luoshan and Han Sueki. Zhang Luoshan's lips, which were originally moist and shiny, were slightly cracked at this time. She pursed them tightly, and her delicate body trembled slightly, as if she would fall to the ground at any time. Beside her, Han Sueki's face was as pale as paper, her body was shaky, her eyes were dull, and she almost fainted. She regretted it very much now. Why did she say that bad thing at the beginning, causing herself to kneel for 3 days and 3 nights? Han Sueki wanted to cry but had no tears at this time, and she wanted to slap herself a few times. Sister, I'm sorry, I caused you to suffer with me. Zhang Luoshan lowered her head, feeling extremely guilty. Although she didn't say a few words to the other party during these 3 days, they also got to know each other briefly. When she knew that the other party was punished to kneel down for her plea, Zhang Luoshan's guilt was simply indescribable. If it weren't for me, Han Sueki wouldn't have to go through all this. I don't blame you. Hearing the words in her ears, Han Sueki forced herself to cheer up and smiled. It was meaningless to say whether it was strange or not at this time. It was better to do him a favor, maybe it could be used in the future. Hearing this, Zhang Luoshan felt even more guilty. Too many people have been implicated because of her, and she didn't want to implicate others anymore. Zhang Luoshan took a deep breath, then endured the humiliation in her heart, walked slowly to the gate of Viang Palace in a kneeling posture, and kowtowed deeply. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 136. Master, if you want to punish me, just punish me. This matter has nothing to do with Sister Sueki. I beg you to have mercy. Zhang Luoshan's voice sounded, with a strong sense of pleading. Then she raised her head and looked at the palace gate, her eyes full of hope. However, what responded to her was just a majestic and indifferent voice. I need you to teach me how to do things. Zhang Luoshan's delicate body trembled, and the hope in her eyes suddenly dimmed, like broken glass. Owner. She opened her mouth and kowtowed to the ground again, with the purple color already visible on her snow-white forehead. But she didn't notice it at all, still kowtowing stubbornly. This is the only thing she can do now. Apart from this, Zhang Luoshan couldn't think of anything else of value to him. However, even if she did this, it would be of no use. The gate of Vyang Palace remained motionless. Even that majestic and indifferent voice no longer sounded, as if it was too lazy to pay attention to them. This made Zhang Luoshan completely despair. She kept kowtowing, blood was already visible on her snow-white forehead, but she still stubbornly did not stop, but the tears that had accumulated in her eyes kept rolling down. Master, Master, Luo is willing to accept the punishment for my sister. Zhang Luoshan raised his head and said in a voice as thin as a mosquito. There were two clearly visible tears on her beautiful face, which made people feel distressed. But the gate of Vyang Palace remained motionless, as if her voice could not be heard at all. Seeing this, Zhang Luoshan's eyes became increasingly moist, and crystal clear tears kept rolling down. If the former Zhenbei army saw this scene, their jaws would definitely drop in shock. This is His Royal Highness, whom everyone admires. He is so majestic and graceful. It is no exaggeration to say that the goddess of the nine heavens has come to the world. Now he is like the most humble slave, kneeling on the ground and begging for mercy. No one would believe this. But it is true. In Vyang Palace, in the spacious bedroom, candlelight flickered. Qin Mu was lying on his side on the dragon chair, tapping the armrest with his fingers, looking lazily, looking at the two daughters Zhang Luoshan and Han Sueki outside the hall. It's not enough, there's still one last thing left. Qin Mu whispered, with a smile on his lips. It can only be said that Zhang Luoshan's pride has been destroyed in the past few days, but her belief has not been completely destroyed. But it's not difficult at all. As long as the northern territory that she values most is turned into a pile of ruins, and then she is told that she is responsible for all this, her faith will be hit like never before. Even failure is inevitable. In the end it was reduced to a cream puff making machine. Qin Mu smiled slightly. He got up. Head outside. Rumble. The palace door opens. Zhang Luoshan, who was still kowtowing, became energetic and suddenly raised his head. When she saw Qin Mu, a bright light bloomed in her beautiful and dull pupils, which seemed to be alive. Master, Master. Please forgive Sister Sueki, she is innocent. Zhang Luoshan's beautiful eyes widened, her eyes instantly turned red, tears couldn't stop flowing, and she said sadly. Qin Mu smiled and said nothing, walking step by step. Tread. 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 Every time he stepped out, it was like a heavy hammer hitting Zhang Luoshan's heart. The trembling of her delicate body became more and more violent, almost suffocating, and her eyes were filled with pleading. Qin Mu approached step by step. Soon, he came to Zhang Luoshan, squatted down gently, stretched out his hands and pressed them on her shoulders. You want to save her? Beg for mercy for her. Qin Mu asked softly. Zhang Luoshan nodded his head vigorously. Even though she knew in her heart that this possibility was slim. But she still wanted to try it. Qin Mu rubbed Zhang Luoshan's hair, gently stroked her slightly bloody forehead with his thumb, and said with a little distress. What are you doing with so much force? Doesn't it hurt? It won't look good if your appearance is disfigured. Master, Master. Feeling the warm and thick hand brushing his forehead, Zhang Luoshan's heart was shaken, and his heartbeat accelerated several times involuntarily. She suddenly felt that her eyes were sore and the tip of her nose was sore. She bit her lips with her teeth, trying to keep herself from collapsing, but her body was shaking violently. She has really endured too much during this period of time. Zhang Luoshan tried his best to hold back, but the tears continued to fall, flowing down the jade neck into the skirt of his clothes and disappearing. Qin Mu smiled. He slowly stood up, looked down at Zhang Luoshan, and said, I can spare her, but you have to accompany me to a place. What, where? Hearing Qin Mu's promise, Zhang Luoshan's beautiful eyes lit up and he hurriedly asked in a crying voice. As long as Han Sueki's safety can be guaranteed, she can go anywhere. You'll know when we get there. Qin Mu didn't disclose it, just said it lightly. Okay, okay. Zhang Luoshan nodded and did not continue to ask. Get up first. Seeing Zhang Luoshan's shivering appearance, Qin Mu sighed slightly and helped her up. Zhang Luoshan's beautiful eyes opened slightly, feeling flattered, like a frightened little rabbit. She didn't dare to look at Qin Mu, but just lowered her head. Let's go. Seeing this, Qin Mu smiled, patted Zhang Luoshan's head, and then walked out of the hall. Zhang Luoshan glanced at Han Sueki, wanting to say something but stopping. Don't worry, I have pardoned her. Qin Mu said lightly, sensing Zhang Luoshan's worry. Zhang Luoshan's tense nerves relaxed after hearing this. She wiped the tears from her eyes, dragged her weak body, and staggered to keep up with Qin Mu's footsteps. The northern border. Everywhere you look is full of wounds. One city after another was breached, and corpses were lying everywhere. Blood gathered into a river, and broken limbs and corpses were scattered all over the land, like a Shura purgatory. As for the major families that supported the rebellion of the Zhenbei army, they suffered heavy losses and were almost wiped out. When Zhang Luoshan saw this scene, she was stunned and sluggish. She almost couldn't believe her eyes, and her pretty face was as pale as paper. Although the North has been in constant war, it has never been as horrible as it is now. Why is it like this? Zhang Luoshan murmured to herself, with deep sorrow and pain in her eyes. Qin Mu stood beside her and asked lightly, do you regret it? These tragedies are all caused by you. Zhang Luoshan was silent. After a long time, she spoke, I have implicated them. I am ashamed of the millions of people in the north. I deserve to die. Her voice was a little hoarse, tears flashed in her eyes, and she choked with sobs. If she hadn't insisted on helping her father to take revenge, perhaps, the north would not have fallen into war, and so many innocent people would not have died. It's all her fault. Zhang Luoshan's heart was numb with pain, and she wanted to escape from it all. Even, she began to feel that the voice in her heart was right, she could completely throw away the past and embrace a new life again. A life without hatred, troubles, and sadness. A life that only belongs to the master. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 137. As soon as this thought arose, Zhang Luoshan's heart trembled. She felt as if something was being crazily eroded inside her. At this moment, she felt a very strange burning sensation in her lower abdomen, as if her internal organs were burning. As the burning sensation became stronger and stronger, her body became hotter and hotter, her cheeks gradually turned red, and her whole body became limp, as if there was a fire burning her mind. Don't come. Zhang Luoshan's eyes were distracted, blurred, and empty, as if he was talking in sleep. Her thoughts became extremely chaotic, and she heard a voice full of temptation again. It was as if the devil's whisper was constantly entering her ears, making her fall, intoxicating her, and making her unable to help but sink into it. It seemed as if it was pulling her into a dark abyss from which she would never be able to escape. Who is it? Who is this voice? How could I forget my father's hatred and the people in the north? Can't. No. Zhang Luoshan covered his ears with his hands and used all his strength to resist this evil sound. She struggled and resisted, but to no avail. That voice was like a devil, bewitching her mind and guiding her soul. Zhang Luoshan bit the tip of her tongue suddenly. The sharp sting made her feel a roar in her mind, and her eyes gradually returned to clarity. No. That's not the case. All this was obviously caused by that foolish king. He is the culprit. How can you blame me? The crusade against the Hunjun is what the people want. I was not wrong, it was the Hunjun who was wrong. Everything I did was to save the northern territory. This was the case when I raised troops to resist, and it is the same now when I kneel down to plead for mercy. From beginning to end, my original intention has not changed. Zhang Luoshan repeated it over and over again in his heart, his eyes becoming clearer and clearer. I'm not wrong. I just did what I had to do. I've tried my best. Zhang Luoshan clenched her fists tightly, her nails digging into the flesh of her palms, and bright red blood dripped down her fingers, but she seemed unaware and just stared ahead stubbornly. She really tried her best. Whether she started a rebellion at the beginning or abandoned her dignity after the defeat and knelt down to beg for mercy from the foolish king, she had done everything she could. She owes nothing to anyone and has a clear conscience. Zhang Luoshan stood up unsteadily, and her eyes gradually became firm. She looked at Qin Mu and said word by word. I'm not wrong. It's you who should admit your mistake. If you weren't such a fool, so many people wouldn't have died. Her eyes shone with stubbornness, her eyes became clearer and clearer, and she seemed to have found herself again. Qin Mu was stunned for a moment, then raised his eyebrows slightly and said with a smile, it seems that I still underestimate you. You are indeed the daughter of luck and the future empress, you have gotten rid of your inner demons so quickly. He originally thought that after seeing the slaughter in the north, his faith would completely collapse, and he would be marked by the demons and become his most loyal slave. But unexpectedly, Zhang Luoshan still got rid of the influence of the demon mark at a very fast speed. However, Qin Mu was not too surprised. Anyway, Zhang Luoshan has been completely controlled by him, and his fall is only a matter of time. Take your time and don't rush. If you succeed all at once, it will be boring. Zhang Luoshan pursed her thin lips and said nothing, but looked at Qin Mu stubbornly. After a while, Zhang Luoshan was defeated and took the initiative to shift his gaze and look around. She looked at the devastated place with mountains of corpses, her eyes firm, and an inexplicable emotion seemed to be growing in her heart. Now that you have completely humiliated me, and the north has been completely reduced to ruins, what are you going to do next? Continue to humiliate me? Zhang Luoshan raised his eyes and stared at Qin Mu again. Up to now, except for her own life and body, she had lost everything else. Zhang Luoshan felt that he had nothing to fear. Qin Mu noticed her movements and chuckled, actually, these are just some of the northern residents who participated in the rebellion, and some of them survived. With just one word, even the psychological defense that Zhang Luoshan had just established collapsed again. You didn't lie to me. Zhang Luoshan's eyes turned red instantly, his face turned pale, and his tone was choked. I am not a murderous person. I am just clearing out those rebels and eliminating future troubles. Of course I will not kill all those innocent people. Qin Mu spoke calmly. Hearing this, Zhang Luoshan's eyes twitched slightly. Are you not a murderous person? I'm afraid there will never be an emperor more murderous than you in this world. The entire northern territory has been destroyed by you, why don't you call it cruel? Although Zhang Luoshan knew that the foolish king in front of him was moody, he never acted according to common sense. But such unconventional words came out of his mouth so calmly. As if this is the natural thing. Zhang Luoshan took a deep breath, tried hard to control his emotions, knelt down slowly and said softly. Thank you, Master, for your forgiveness. This incident was all caused by her. If she had not led the army to rebel, this tragic scene would not have occurred in the north. Now that there are still residents of the northern border surviving, she naturally has to shoulder the responsibility. She's been controlled again. A sense of sadness rose in Zhang Luoshan's heart. The man in front of her was too terrifying. He always gave her hope when she was desperate, and gave her more despair while giving her hope. But she couldn't care so much at this time. Now there was only one way to go. Afterwards, Zhang Luoshan raised her head again and looked at Qin Mu, Master, can I see them? Qin Mu smiled faintly and nodded, of course. Hearing Qin Mu's good talk, Zhang Luoxin's body trembled slightly, a hint of joy appeared in her eyes, and she hurriedly said, "Thank you, Master." Qin Mu smiled but said nothing. In fact, it's not that there is no progress. At least Zhang Luoxin's calling of Master was very smooth, and it was obvious that she had adapted. But, before you go to see those people again, you still need to complete a ceremony. Qin Mu's eyes were dark, and there was a mysterious smile at the corner of his mouth. Ceremony. Zhang Luoxin was stunned and looked at Qin Mu in confusion. Qin Mu hooked his finger at Zhang Luoxin, signaling her to come closer. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Len Mi and Bulletin Leng. Chapter 138. Zhang Luoxin hesitated for a moment, then walked up to Qin Mu and looked up at Qin Mu. The two were so close that each could smell the fragrance coming from the other's body, and even feel the other's warm breath. Qin Mu reached out and touched her soft and smooth black hair. Owner. The sudden touch made Zhang Luoxin's cheeks flush slightly, and he did not dare to look directly at Qin Mu. I have to admit that this man does have an extremely handsome appearance. Even if he knows that he is a fool, he still makes people feel extremely dazzling, just like a tomato reader. Especially the pair of deep eyes, full of aggression, make people unable to help but be addicted. Qin Mu suddenly leaned down, close to her face, and his warm breath sprayed on her tender skin. Zhang Luoxin's breathing was stagnant, and his body was a little stiff. His pretty face turned red instantly, and his breathing became heavier. He bit his red lips tightly and did not dare to speak. You don't have to be so nervous. Qin Mu's low and magnetic voice sounded in his ears, I just want to give you something. He wrapped his arms around her slender waist, picked her up, put her on his lap, and let her sit in his arms. Zhang Luoxin's body began to weaken, his eyes evaded, and he avoided Qin Mu's gaze in a panic. The corners of Qin Mu's mouth curved into an evil curve. He slowly approached, leaned into Zhang Luoxin's ear and whispered. This ritual is very important. If you cannot complete it, then I will still not forgive the surviving northern residents. His breath brushed against his earlobes, bringing with it waves of numbness. Zhang Luoxin's heartbeat suddenly accelerated, his body became more limp, his head roared, and he completely forgot to resist. Master, don't worry, Luo'er will definitely finish it. Zhang Luoxin's voice was trembling, and his cheeks were as red as a ripe apple. Qin Mu smiled and said, Are you ready? Yeah. Zhang Luoxin closed his eyes, his eyelashes trembling slightly. Qin Mu raised the corner of his mouth slightly, touched her delicate chin with his fingers, and rubbed it gently. A low and hoarse voice whispered in her ear, Take it. Along with Qin Mu's voice, a string of crystal necklaces slowly appeared in her palm. The necklace is crystal clear and has a half-moon shape. The top is inlaid with a round and clear jade stone, which seems to be made of water droplets. Zhang Luoxin opened his eyes and looked at the crystal necklace in his palm, his eyes filled with confusion. Master, what is this? Qin Mu leaned over and whispered a few words into Zhang Luoxin's ear, then stepped away and looked at her with a smile. After hearing this, Zhang Luoxin's eyes suddenly widened, his pupils shrank violently, and his cheeks turned crimson, as if they were dyed with a layer of gorgeous rays of light. Master, how can this be? Seeing her hesitation, Qin Mu raised his eyebrows slightly and said in a leisurely tone, What? Luo'er doesn't want to. As soon as he finished speaking, a wisp of coercion suddenly descended. Zhang Luoxin trembled all over and shook his head subconsciously. Then put it on. Qin Mu gently patted Zhang Luoxin's face, his voice low and mellow, with a hint of bewitching charm. Zhang Luoxin gritted his teeth and finally gave in. He obediently stretched out his hands, carefully held the crystal necklace, closed his eyes, and gently put it on. The wearing process was not smooth. Because Zhang Luoshan had never worn jewelry before, he couldn't find the right position for a while. In addition, his technique was not very skillful, so it took him a long time to put the crystal necklace on his body. After doing all this, Zhang Luoshan breathed a long sigh of relief. Beads of sweat had already appeared on his forehead, and his cheeks were rosy. Qin Mu stood up, stretched out his right hand, and gently twisted the other end of the crystal necklace with his index finger and thumb. There was a smile on his lips, admiration and satisfaction in his eyes, and he praised. "It's so beautiful. It was made just for you. You fit it perfectly. Master likes it, that's fine." Zhang Luoshan blushed, lowered her eyes, and murmured softly. She really had never worn jewelry before, let alone thought about wearing such jewelry. Now wearing it on her body, it always feels weird. Especially when the owner's eyes fell on him, his heart was beating fast and he wanted to escape from here immediately. "Let's go." After Zhang Luoshan was properly dressed, Qin Mu nodded with satisfaction, then stood up and walked aside, while Zhang Luoshan followed behind him. It's just that the pace is a little weird, like stepping on clouds, ethereal, and every step seems to be particularly strenuous. Soon, Qin Mu's dragon chariot stopped above a mansion that covered an extremely large area and was extremely luxuriously decorated. Zhang Luoshan knelt down on the dragon chariot and looked at the familiar mansion with complex expressions in his eyes. This mansion is the Zhenbei Palace. Outside the Zhenbei Prince's mansion, stood the northern monks who could not see beyond. Preliminary estimates put these people at least tens of millions. Their clothes were in rags, their injuries were heavy, and everyone's face was filled with sadness and pain. They were all monks from the north, and they were staring at Long Chu in the distance with trembling eyes. Behind these monks, there are densely packed civilians, numbering hundreds of millions. These are the people from the northern border who have escaped. The originally prosperous northern territory was reduced to ruins at this moment. They watched their cities shatter and their homes turn into dust. They watched the sect they had worked so hard to build being razed to the ground, watched their former fellow disciples fall in a pool of blood one by one, watched their beloved women being taken away. The once glorious Northland completely disappeared, leaving only wounds and corpses everywhere. Their enemies sat high on the dragon chariot, looking down on the world. And they had to. "Greetings, Your Majesty." All the people in the Northland knelt on the ground, shouting dully. Zhang Luoshan stared at the scene blankly, tears could not stop flowing down, and her eyes gradually moistened. At this time, Qin Mu slowly stepped off the chariot, his eyes swept over the crowd, and a cold arc rose at the corner of his mouth. "Do you know your crime? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid." Author, Len Mian Buletin Leng. Chapter 139. The icy voice reached everyone's ears, and they were shocked. "We know our sins," the monks of the Northern Territory kowtowed one after another. They knew their fate very well, and could only admit defeat. All the surviving monks of the Northern Territory were silent, and dared not breathe. They lowered their heads and trembled. Zhang Luoshan stared at the scene in a daze, and felt an inexplicable emotion surging in her chest. She suddenly remembered a sentence, "Heaven is ruthless, and the people are innocent." She wanted to ask, "What is the guilt of the people?" But she didn't have the courage to say it, and even without Qin Mu's permission, she didn't dare to get up and walk out of the dragon chariot. She finally managed to stabilize her master, and she must not make her master angry again. Otherwise, who knows what terrible results will be. After this period of adjustment, Zhang Luoshan has developed an instinctive fear of Qin Mu. This kind of fear does not even need the influence of the demon mark, it is simply the fear hidden in the depths of her soul. Qin Mu used his mood swings, cruelty and ruthlessness to leave an unforgettable shadow on Zhang Luoshan's fragile heart. You have committed a heinous crime and numerous crimes, and you deserve to be executed. Qin Mu's voice was calm and calm. As soon as the voice fell, tens of millions of Northern Territory monks were frightened and collapsed to the ground, and even their breathing became rapid. Don't kill us. Please spare us. Your Majesty. We know we are wrong. Please let us go. I am willing to give you all my belongings. I just hope you can spare my life. Please have mercy. Your Majesty, please have mercy. Your Majesty, you are so merciful, please spare us. Wailing sounded everywhere, and a group of Northern Territory monks desperately crawled forward, crying and begging. For a while, various begging voices came one after another. All the monks in the northern region prostrate themselves on the ground, desperately kowtowing to Qin Mu. The scene was horrific and shocking. After experiencing this catastrophe personally, their hearts and minds were completely wiped out, leaving only fear and panic. They really didn't want to endure such torture again. Now their only thought was to save their lives. They would rather give all their belongings to Qin Mu in exchange for a way to survive. Zhang Luoshan looked at everything below, her hands couldn't help but tightly grasp the hem of her skirt, her teeth bit her lips lightly, and she said nothing. Her heart was once again filled with deep guilt. Although she thought she had a clear conscience, these monks in the northern region were indeed implicated by her and suffered such a disaster. All this was caused by her. Zhang Luoshan lowered her head, and her heart was still unable to let go. Master, spare them. After a long time, Zhang Luoshan raised his head and said timidly. However, Qin Mu's expression did not change at all. He was indifferent as always. He glanced at the monks kneeling on the ground indifferently. Just when Zhang Luoshan began to despair slowly in his heart, Qin Mu's indifferent voice came. Raise your heads. Hearing this, the monks in the northern border slowly raised their heads, their eyes were frightened and afraid. Qin Mu looked down at them, his tone cold. Since ancient times, those who attempted rebellion have all ended up with their 9 clans implicated. When you rebelled, have you ever thought about what will happen to your descendants? Hearing this, all the monks shuddered and showed panic on their faces. Your Majesty, please forgive us. Your Majesty, please forgive us. We will never dare to do it again. Your Majesty, we will never dare to do it again, please forgive us. We are willing to submit to you and follow you forever. Your Majesty, please have mercy, as long as you let us go, we can agree to anything. The monks of the Northern Territory knelt down and begged, and kept kowtowed to Qin Mu for mercy. Seeing the monks of the Northern Territory groveling and begging for mercy, Zhang Luoshan's pretty face was full of complex expressions. Qin Mu stood with his hands behind his back, his eyes as indifferent as snow. Since you know your crime, I will give you a chance to live. However, the death penalty can be exempted, but the living crime cannot be escaped. When everyone heard this, they were stunned at first, and then, a strong ecstasy suddenly appeared on their faces. They don't have to die. Thank you, Your Majesty. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your mercy. Thank you, Your Majesty, thank you, Your Majesty. They kowtowed frantically, their foreheads were broken and bleeding. After a moment, Qin Mu's voice sounded again. Since your repentance is commendable, I will pardon your crimes today, confiscate your property, demote you to commoners, and never leave the northern region. In addition, from today on, the northern region will increase taxes by 10 times, and pay them regularly every 7 days without any mistakes. As soon as the voice fell, the originally ecstatic northern monks were stunned in place, with an expression of disbelief and confusion on their faces. 10 times. Their annual income is already very little, and now that the northern region is destroyed, rebuilding their homes also requires a certain amount of consumption. Now they are asked to pay 10 times the taxes, and once every 7 days. What's the difference between this and asking for their lives? They felt extremely bitter, but dared not speak it out, let alone refute. They managed to save a small life, but if they dare to question it now, wouldn't they be seeking death? I will obey His Majesty's will. After a brief silence, everyone shouted in unison, the sound shaking the sky. Zhang Luoshan looked down, his eyes moist, and he breathed a long sigh of relief. A big stone finally fell to the ground. Although he was severely punished, he finally saved his life and the foundation of the Northern Territory. At this time. But Qin Mu suddenly smiled inexplicably, and said with a hint of joking. You must be very concerned about someone's safety now. I will fulfill your wish and bring her here today. Who is it? The northern monks were startled and a little confused. Zhang Luoshan was slightly startled. The moment she heard these words, her heart skipped a beat and she felt cold all over. It's over. Sure enough, the next moment, Qin Mu waved his right hand lightly and said calmly, Come out, don't you want to take a look at them? I have given you this opportunity. Zhang Luoshan's eyes trembled, his cheeks turned extremely red, his lips pressed tightly together, and his delicate body became weak. Qin Mu obviously meant this to her. A strong sense of shame instantly hit his body, making Zhang Luoshan almost suffocate. She really wanted to meet these people. But now she. Zhang Luoshan held the hem of her skirt tightly with both hands, bit her pink thin lips with her teeth, and looked at Qin Mu with watery eyes. Qin Mu turned around, walked to her side, smiled softly, and said in a voice that only two people could hear. Don't worry, no one will see it. Zhang Luoshan's pretty face turned red. After hesitating for a moment, she finally moved her lotus step slightly, taking a slightly weird step, and slowly walked out of Longhu. At the beginning, I gave the future empress her death. I became stronger because I was stupid. Author, Leng Mi and Buletin Leng. Chapter 140. Soon, Qin Mu and Zhang Luoshan came to the city wall and stood side by side. Qin Mu stood with his hands behind his back, his face calm. Zhang Luoshan closed his eyes tightly, as if brewing some emotions. On the way here, she changed into a pure white dress, with a slender and exquisite figure, ethereal and untainted by the mundane world, like a fairy walking out of a scroll, making people reluctant to blaspheme. No one would have thought that such a fairy-like person would have a mystery under her skirt at this time. And the moment Zhang Luoshan came to the city wall, the monk from the north who was kneeling on the ground praying suddenly froze in place, staring at her with his eyes wide open. The next second, everyone's eyes were focused on Zhang Luoshan. Your Highness. Yes, it's Your Highness. Oh my God, am I really seeing things right? Your Highness actually appeared. Your Highness is actually still alive. Your Highness, help, save us. Instantly, the entire Northern Territory was in a frenzy. Everyone was like crazy, climbing up the city wall frantically, trying to get close to Zhang Luoshan and ask her for help. Your Highness. Your Highness. Everyone was crying and crying. Groups of ordinary people and monks in the Northern Territory also gathered around at this time, with red eyes and tears streaming down their faces. The moment they saw Zhang Luoshan, everyone's heart twitched violently, their noses felt sour, and their tears could not stop falling. This scene was so familiar. When the Northern Territory went out to fight that day, Your Highness stood on the city wall like this, heroic and high-spirited. She was like a female war god, leading them to fight against the tyrant and march to Chang'an. No one can stop her wherever she goes, and she is invincible. She is like a bright moon hanging in the sky, illuminating the direction they are heading, giving them the strength to move forward, and dispelling the fear in their hearts. Her existence is a belief, a towering mountain. But now, the former goddess of war has become a prisoner. How can they not be heartbroken? The moment they saw Zhang Luoshan, they realized more clearly than ever before that the North Territory was defeated after all. A feeling of grief swept over everyone, even making them forget their fear, and they just wanted to cry loudly to vent their unwillingness and grievances. Qin Mu watched her quietly without urging her. Gradually, Zhang Luoshan opened her eyes, and her beautiful eyes looked at the people kneeling on the ground below, and the monks from the North Territory who were wailing all around. Her heart was like a knife, and her eyes were hot. She lifted her sleeves to wipe the corners of her eyes, trying to suppress the pain and guilt in her heart, taking a deep breath, and trying to squeeze out a bright smile. You all have suffered. I'm sorry. It's all my fault. Her voice was gentle, but low, revealing an extremely strong sense of apology. Your Highness, don't blame yourself. We are useless and failed to help your Highness. Your Highness, don't feel guilty. This is our own choice. No one can be blamed. Yes, Your Highness. It's our incompetence that led to such a tragic defeat. I'm sorry. Everyone choked and cried. When the Qin army came, they were once desperate. But they didn't expect that Your Highness was still alive. This is extremely exciting for all the people in the north. Because only if Your Highness is alive, there is hope and the north has a future. Zhang Luoshan's beautiful eyes turned red when she heard this. She knew that these northern monks were loyal to her, but unfortunately, she was destined to disappoint them. Zhang Luoshan shook her head and said softly, "It's not your fault. If you want to blame someone, blame me for being too stupid at the beginning." Many monks from the Northern Territory were stunned when they heard her words, and they did not understand what she said for a moment. And at this moment, Zhang Luoshan's voice suddenly rose. I was too stupid. I tried to resist the master with my weak strength, but ended up killing hundreds of thousands of elite soldiers in the Northern Territory. She glanced at the densely packed monks from the Northern Territory below, and continued. Now your homes have been destroyed and you have become prisoners. I, Zhang Luoshan, am sorry for you, your relatives and friends, and the billions of people in the Northern Territory. I am sorry. As Zhang Luoshan spoke, the tears in her beautiful eyes surged again, and then they fell on the jade brick floor in front of her toes. She choked and said, I don't expect you to forgive me, I just hope you can live well. As she finished speaking, everyone below fell into dead silence, their eyes dull and unbelievable. They simply couldn't believe what they had just heard. Your Highness actually admitted the crime. This isn't Your Highness. She is the Princess of the North, the gifted Highness, and the eternal goddess of war in their hearts. Why would she suddenly admit such a mistake? And she actually called the great Qin tyrant her master in an extremely humble state. Everyone was stunned and couldn't believe their ears. Your Highness. Your Highness, what's wrong with you? Countless people panicked, shouting anxiously. And an old servant in the Zhenbei palace fell to the ground and roared at the city wall. Your Highness. You are right, as long as you give the order, we can continue to fight. His turbid old tears slid down his wrinkled cheeks, his body trembled, and he roared with all his might. He was seriously injured and his body was hunched, but at this moment he seemed to have turned into a grey lion, roaring angrily, and his voice shook the world. But the next moment, his voice stopped abruptly. Shua! A sharp cold light flashed through the void, cutting through the sky, and in the blink of an eye it pierced the old servant's head, and blood spurted out. A corpse fell to the ground with a plop. Then, it returned to calm. Everything seemed to have never happened, only the cold corpse of the old servant proved that something had really happened just now. And under the city wall, the originally noisy crowd suddenly fell into silence, without exception. Everyone stared at the old servant's body in a daze. There was still a sharp dagger inserted. After killing the man, a man in black walked out slowly, holding a bloody dagger in his hand. It was Li Hanshan, the leader of the Dark God Guard. His eyes were cold, like a messenger of death. In his hand, he was holding a bloody head. The face of the head was distorted, as if it was full of fear and disbelief before death. It was the old servant. Seeing this scene, Zhang Luoshan was stunned and did not speak for a long time. There were still crystal tears in her eyes. This old servant was one of the housekeepers of the Zhenbei Palace. Although he was very old, he had always been loyal. He never married or took concubines in his life, and he didn't even have children. It can be said that he dedicated his whole life to the Zhenbei Palace. But now, Zhang Luoshan felt his throat dry and mist appeared in his eyes. Your Highness. Everyone called out with a gloomy face, but did not dare to say anything else. They could only lower their heads silently, feeling depressed.